Please subscribe, like, and share. It really helps us out. And of course, if you have any questions, comment below, and we will answer you as soon as we can. Welcome to another video in our series on IGCSE History. In today's lesson, we will be giving an overview of the Cold War. If you haven't seen our previous videos, click on the card above.
We're going to start out this section by doing an overview of the Cold War. The Cold War was a rivalry that began at the end of World War II between two superpowers, the USA and the USSR. It led to many crises around the world, such as the Berlin Wall and the Vietnam War. The Cold War is a title given to the period of tension between the two superpowers, the United States of America and the Soviet Union. The conflict grew initially from an ideological difference due to the fact that the Soviet Union was a communist country whose government and economic system was at odds with the capitalist democratic America. Despite their differences, the USA and the USSR were able to join together in an uneasy wartime alliance against Nazi Germany during World War II. However, once the war was won, this wartime alliance began to fall apart. The ideological differences between the two developed into outright hostility. You will need to see the Cold War in three distinct phases: the emerging superpower rivalry between 1945 and 1949, Cold War confrontations, and Cold War conflicts. Firstly, let's look at the emerging superpower rivalry between 1945 and 1949. First, let's look at Soviet expansion. After World War II, Russia argued that they needed a buffer zone around them. They had been invaded by Germany in both world wars. They claimed if they had a group of communist states around them, they would be protected against further invasions in the future. It was agreed at the Yalta conference in February 1945 that there would be free and fair elections in countries that had been occupied by the Nazis in World War II. In the meantime, the Soviets were allowed to install governments friendly to them in these countries. It became clear by the Potsdam conference in July 1945 that the Soviets had no intention of holding free and fair elections, and was busy installing communist governments across Eastern Europe. The new American president, Harry Truman, was far more confrontational than his predecessor, Franklin Roosevelt, had been. Safe in the knowledge that America had tested an atomic bomb, so no longer needed Russia's help in defeating Japan, Truman was hostile towards Stalin. The seeds of the Cold War rivalry had been sown. So what was America's response? In a bid to prevent communism spreading further, Harry Truman announced the Truman Doctrine in 1947. This was a speech to Congress asking for $400 million to help Greece and Turkey recover from the effects of the Nazi occupation and avoid the communist threat. This also committed America to a policy of containment to help any country threatened by communism. The Truman Doctrine was followed by the Marshall Plan. In 1948, General George Marshall travelled to Europe to see how much aid was needed to help Europe recover from the effects of the war. A total of $17 billion was committed to help support the policy of containment. A crisis emerged in Berlin where America changed the currency of West Germany to prevent Marshall aid getting to the communist East. Stalin was livid and installed a blockade of road, rail and canal routes from West Germany into West Berlin. Truman claimed Stalin was trying to force West Berlin to become communist and had to decide how to respond. He could have broken through the blockade, but instead decided an airlift For 11 months, Allied planes flew supplies into Berlin until Stalin lifted the blockade. Shooting down a plane would be too risky at a time when America was the world's only nuclear power. Secondly, Cold War confrontations. Two key confrontations of the Cold War were the building of the Berlin Wall in 1961 and the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. First, the Berlin Wall. A further crisis arose in Berlin in 1961. Millions of people had immigrated from East Berlin to the West in the years after World War II. This was embarrassing for communism and suggested that their system was inferior to capitalism. Russian leader Khrushchev claimed the wall was in fact a way of preventing American spies from infiltrating the communist East. As the wall was constructed, there was a standoff at Checkpoint Charlie as US and Soviet tanks faced off against each other. Had either side opened fire, war would have broken out. As it was, both sides eventually backed down, and President Kennedy remarked it was better to have a wall than a war. The wall seemed to have ended the problems of Berlin as a Cold War flashpoint. Second, the Cuban Missile Crisis. In Cuba, a revolution by Fidel Castro in 1959 resulted in America having a communist country just 90 miles from its border. After a botched attempt to overthrow Castro with the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, a crisis was sparked in 1962 when American U-2 spy planes found evidence of Soviet missile sites under construction in Cuba. American President Kennedy considered many options to deal with this threat, eventually deciding to put a naval quarantine in place. As Soviet ships advanced towards the blockade, it appeared as though confrontation was inevitable. Khrushchev sent letters to Kennedy and a peaceful resolution was found. The Soviet missiles were removed and America agreed that it would not invade Cuba, leaving a communist government on their doorstep. After the crisis, steps were taken to avoid the prospect of nuclear war in the future. America agreed to remove their missiles from Turkey. A telephone hotline was set up between the Kremlin and the White House, and a nuclear test ban treaty was agreed. Lastly, Cold War conflicts. The Cold War sometimes resulted in open conflicts, for example the Vietnam War and the Soviet War in Afghanistan. Firstly, the Vietnam War. Having seen the spread of communism in Europe, America was concerned that something similar could happen in Asia. Their belief in the domino theory, that lots of countries could fall quickly to communism once one did, led to them sending troops to help prevent the spread of communism from North Vietnam to South. The one challenge America faced was finding their enemy, the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong were a guerrilla force that lived in South Vietnam amongst the civilian population. They had extensive tunnel networks, used hit-and-run tactics, and received supplies from North Vietnam via the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which came into the south via Cambodia and Laos. In response to these tactics, the American Army used many tactics which ultimately were counterproductive and served only to turn the civilian population in both South Vietnam and in America against the war. Tactics such as Search and Destroy, Operation Rolling Thunder, Agent Orange and Napalm all failed to defeat the Viet Cong. After the North Vietnamese Tet Offensive in 1968, President Johnson decided against seeking re-election and he was replaced by Richard Nixon. Nixon pursued a policy of Vietnamization to try and replace American soldiers with well-trained South Vietnamese troops. This plan ultimately failed, but it did lead to the withdrawal of American troops. The North eventually succeeded in taking over South Vietnam in 1975, unifying it as a communist state. American intervention had failed. Secondly, the Soviet war in Afghanistan. In 1979, the Soviet army invaded Afghanistan in a war that became known as their Vietnam. The pro-Soviet Afghan government was unpopular with the Muslim population, as many of their laws and rules stopped people following their religious beliefs. The Mujahideen fought against the Soviet invasion. They had support from the American government, first Jimmy Carter, then Ronald Reagan, which funded American equipment and supplies, which was sent into Afghanistan via Pakistan. America also boycotted the Moscow Olympics in 1980 in protest at the Soviet invasion. The mountainous terrain and extreme weather made it difficult for Soviet soldiers to cope with the conditions. Much like the American army in Vietnam, they resorted to tactics that ultimately failed, such as airstrikes. Mikhail Gorbachev decided the war was too costly, both economically and in terms of losses to the Russian army. He took the decision to end the war and withdraw the Soviet army in 1989. The Cold War was coming to an end, but problems in Afghanistan were to return in the future. Over the coming weeks, we will break this down into more manageable bits. I hope to see you then.
Thank you for watching our video. Please like, subscribe and share. And comment below so we can clarify things for you.